So, back in 2014, there was this young man, a deeply disturbed young man, who left behind a series of audio tapes.
Right, those recordings.
Yeah. And in them, he was arguing something just, well, completely wild. He argued that a rock is fundamentally superior to a human being.
Which sounds completely absurd at first, right?
Right. But his reasoning was that the rock doesn't suffer from the disease of, like, meaning. It's totally free from the agony of needing anything or wanting anything.
He just exists.
Exactly. It's not striving for anything at all. So today, we are going to ask a pretty terrifying question. What if our frantic modern pursuit of meaning, what if it isn't the cure for our unhappiness, but actually the disease itself?
I mean, that premise alone turns thousands of years of human thought completely upside down.
Oh, totally.
We're so used to viewing a lack of meaning as the ultimate tragedy. Like, we diagnose our cultural malaise, our anxiety, our depression as a quote-unquote crisis of meaning.
Yeah, we think the solution is just to find more of it.
Exactly, or to manufacture it or dig it up from the past. But when you really investigate the structure of how we experience value, it suggests we might be, fundamentally misdiagnosing our own psychological landscape.
And that right there is the mission for this deep dive. We are tracing the massive, epic history of meaning today.
It's a huge undertaking.
It really is. We are pulling together this towering stack of sources, and we're going from the foundational texts of Western philosophy all the way to psychological frameworks, and even into these deep and, frankly, very dark internet critiques.
Yeah, to map out exactly how human beings have historically defined meaning.
Right, how we defined it, how we lost it, how we frantically tried to rebuild it, and, the hidden dangers that emerge when our pursuit of meaning actually turns against us.
It's a really ambitious arc. We're looking at how meaning transformed from a cosmic guarantee into this terrifying psychological burden. And finally, how we might actually be able to ground it in the reality of our own raw experience. But before we begin mapping this territory, we need to set the stage regarding the sources we're unpacking today.
For sure. To trace this history accurately, we're pulling from a super wide spectrum of thought. We're going to look at ancient Greek philosophy with Plato and Aristotle, medieval scholasticism, and the existentialist rebellion.
We're also incorporating the psychological framing found in Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
Right, but focusing strictly on the philosophical arguments made in Chapter 6.
Exactly. And crucially, we're going to examine modern internet pessimism, specifically the inverted value critique.
Which is often referred to as Eulovism, right?
Yes, which emerged from those incredibly intense and polarizing audio recordings of Adam Lance that we just mentioned.
Yeah.
And finally, it will culminate in the internalist philosophical response to all of this, drawing on the text meaning and value.
Okay, and right here we need to make a very clear disclaimer up front for everyone listening.
Please do, yeah.
Some of the sources analyzed today, particularly those dealing with radical internet pessimism, antinatalism, and these deep cultural critiques, they contain intense, disturbing, and highly polarizing views.
Very much so.
So our deep dive is going to explore these ideas purely to convey the philosophical and structural concepts contained in the original texts. We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints.
Not at all.
We're just unpacking them impartially. We're acting as neutral guides to help you understand the landscape of how meaning has been constructed and deconstructed throughout history.
We are treating these texts as philosophical artifacts. Nothing more, nothing less.
Right. Okay, so with the framework and our boundaries established, let's look at the core revelation waiting for us. Because philosophy has spent centuries treating meaning as something you add to life from the outside.
Like it's a cosmic job description?
Yeah, or a divine mandate. Or even a self-authored project you have to construct from scratch in your journal every morning.
But the central argument we're building toward today is that meaning might already be built into our raw, valenced experience.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the real danger isn't that life is a meaningless void. The danger is that we are drowning in way too much of the wrong kind of meaning, and we've forgotten how to distinguish the map from the territory.
I love that framing. So to understand why modern people are so panicked about losing meaning, I feel like we have to understand what it felt like to have it handed to you on a silver platter first.
We absolutely do.
We have to look at the massive, comfortable philosophical mansions our ancestors used to live in. We can't grasp the terror of the modern crisis without understanding the cosmic architecture that preceded it.
And the Western tradition built a house that was incredibly secure, and that really started with Plato.
Okay, let's dive into Plato.
You have to picture the intellectual chaos Plato was trying to solve. Before Plato, you had Greek thinkers arguing about whether reality was constantly changing.
Like Heraclitus saying you can't step in the same river twice, right?
Mhm. Exactly. Or on the other side, whether reality was completely static and change was just an illusion. So Plato steps into this tension and constructs an architecture where meaning is tied directly to participation in a higher, eternal order. He posits the world of forms.
Let's break down the mechanics of these forms because it's not just a poetic metaphor. It was intended as a literal description of physics and metaphysics, wasn't it?
It was. Think of it this way. If I'm Plato, I'm looking at a physical chair. I know this physical chair is going to rot, the wood will splinter, it's eventually going to turn to dust.
Sure.
So how can the concept of the chair have any permanent meaning if the object itself is doomed?
Right. How does it matter?
Plato solves this by arguing that the physical chair only matters, it only possesses intelligibility and meaning because it reflects or participates in the eternal form of the chair.
But the meaning is somewhere else.
Above the physical world of becoming, changing, and decaying, there is an ultimate reality of the good, the true, and the beautiful. So meaning isn't generated down here in the dirt. Meaning rises toward the form. A meaningful thing is meaningful precisely because it points upward to an intelligible structure that is infinitely more real than the physical object itself.
That's the famous allegory of the cave, isn't it? Like we are chained in a cave watching shadows on the wall.
Yes, exactly.
And the shadow of the chair isn't the real chair, it's just a projection. But the shadow only exists, it only has a shape or a definition because there's a real object casting it, illuminated by a real fire.
The shadow borrows its entire existence from the higher reality.
So for an ancient Greek living in this framework, you didn't have to agonize over the meaning of your life. Your meaning was structurally guaranteed by the degree to which you participated in the eternal forms.
That's right. And then Aristotle comes along a generation later and recognizes a slight problem with Plato's architecture.
Which is what?
Well, having all the meaning floating in a metaphysical sky makes it very difficult to explain biological change and natural processes. Aristotle wants to bring the ceiling down just a bit.
Okay, I see.
He grounds meaning more deeply in the empirical world, but he absolutely maintains the overall cosmic architecture.
Because Aristotle's approach feels much more biological to me. He introduces the concept of telos, which is basically the built-in ultimate purpose of a thing.
Yes, teleology is the absolute core of Aristotelian meaning. For Aristotle, meaning is not just pointing up to a form in the sky, it's folded into the very material of what a thing is becoming.
Can you give an example of how that works?
Let's look at the mechanics of an acorn. In our modern view, an acorn is just genetic material reacting to soil and water. But in Aristotle's view, the acorn actually contains the telos of the oak tree.
So the oak tree's already in there.
The oak tree is the final cause pulling the acorn forward. The acorn is meaningful because it's structured by the universe to fulfill that specific destiny.
So meaning is essentially a gravitational pull from the future.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it, yeah. Every object, every living thing has a form, a function, and a characteristic fulfillment. A human life is intelligible by what it is, what it's for, and the kind of flourishing that belongs uniquely to its nature. The purpose is baked right into the biology and the physics of the universe.
You don't invent your purpose. You discover it through observation of your own nature.
Precisely.
And then this architecture reaches its absolute zenith with scholasticism, right? The medieval synthesis of Plato, Aristotle, and Christian theology.
Yes. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas take the forms of Plato, the teleology of Aristotle, and merge them with the concept of a singular, omnipotent creator.
Wow.
The sources describe scholastic meaning as cosmic placement, and this is where the house gets completely permanently furnished.
So to know what something means in the scholastic worldview is to know its specific, divinely ordained place in a perfectly ordered creation.
They conceptualize the universe as the great chain of being. Everything from the lowest pebble to the highest archangel has a specific rung on the ladder.
Everything has its place.
Essence absolutely precedes existence. You have a nature, a place in the hierarchy of beings, and a final destination before you even take your first breath. God is the ultimate guarantor of this meaning, acting as both the author of the play and the theater in which it takes place.
It's like being born into a colossal pre-furnished house, where every single object has a permanent, indestructible label from the manufacturer telling you exactly what it's for.
That's a great way to put it.
Your job isn't to wander around agonizing over the meaning of a chair. You don't sit down and write essays wondering if the chair is an oppressive cultural construct or an arbitrary arrangement of atoms.
No, not at all.
Your only job is just to learn how to sit in it correctly, in accordance with its divine design.
The psychological comfort of that pre-furnished house really cannot be overstated. I mean, we look back at the medieval period and see immense physical suffering. Famine, plague, brutal warfare, terrifyingly short lifespans.
Yeah, it was grim.
But psychologically, structurally, their suffering meant something. It was part of a cosmic drama. The peasant tilling a frozen field wasn't lost in an indifferent void. They were playing a vital part in a script written by an infinite author.
The universe was legible.
It was a book that could be read, and every single person was a word in that book.
But history doesn't let us stay in that comfortable house forever. The scientific revolution arrives, and it doesn't just rearrange the furniture. It brings in wrecking balls, rips up the floorboards, shatters the stained glass windows, and leaves humanity shivering in an empty dirt lot.
We enter the era of the modern eviction.
Right. And the transition to modernity is fundamentally about a change in how we explain the mechanics of reality, isn't it?
It is the replacement of the concept of purpose with the concept of mechanism. Think of thinkers like Descartes and Newton. Nature is no longer viewed as a book written by God filled with moral lessons and final causes.
It becomes a clockwork system of blind, interacting, deficient causes.
Exactly. So going back to Aristotle's acorn, the modern mechanistic view says the acorn doesn't grow into an oak tree because the future oak tree is pulling it forward. There is no gravitational pull of destiny.
It grows purely because of historical physical pushes from behind. Sunlight hitting a leaf, chemical reactions breaking down soil nutrients, genetic codes executing blindly.
The universe is entirely pushed from behind by physics, not pulled forward by purpose. The universe stops caring. It stops speaking. It becomes a silent machine.
That sounds terrifying.
It creates an unprecedented crisis. Human beings are left holding this intense historical hunger for meaning because our brains are literally wired by thousands of years of evolution and culture to seek out patterns, purposes, and narratives. But the external architecture that used to feed that hunger has been completely dismantled.
The manufacturer's labels have all been ripped off the furniture,
Right.
and this is the exact psychological soil that breeds the existentialist rebellion.
Yes, absolutely.
Thinkers like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Sartre, and Camus, they look at this silent, mechanistic universe, and they realize the old scholastic formula is dead.
Nietzsche's famous declaration that God is dead was not a triumphant atheist victory lap. It was a terrifying diagnosis of this exact architectural collapse.
Oh, interesting.
He was warning that the foundation of our entire moral and meaningful universe had been pulled out from under us, and we just hadn't realized we were in free fall yet.
So the existentialists decide to invert the formula. If essence no longer precedes existence, if there's no divine label on you before you're born, then existence must precede essence.
You exist first as a blank slate in a silent void, and you are condemned to choose, interpret, and create yourself. You have to build the meaning of your life from scratch, using nothing but your own will.
Existentialism doesn't discover meaning waiting in the cosmos. It forces meaning through the wound left by the cosmos.
Sartre tells us that man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Camus looks at the absurd silence of the universe, that fundamental tension between our desire for meaning and the cold indifference of reality, and says we must imagine Sisyphus happy.
We must roll the boulder up the hill, knowing it's going to roll back down.
And we must define our own meaning in the face of the void through sheer, defiant, individualistic will.
I mean, it's a very heroic, romantic posture. But if we're being honest about human psychology, it sounds utterly exhausting.
It is incredibly demanding.
The pressure of having to generate the total meaning of your own life, your own moral code, your own purpose, out of thin air every single day. It's no wonder that anxiety, dread, and nausea are the core themes of existentialist literature. It's just too much weight for one nervous system to bear.
Which is why the philosophical trajectory doesn't stop with existentialism. The sources bring in Wittgenstein here, who tries a completely different approach to the problem of meaning.
What does he do?
Instead of heroic self-creation in the face of the void, he pulls the concept of meaning down from the metaphysical sky entirely and looks at the mundane, ground-level mechanics of human interaction.
Wittgenstein's later philosophy revolves around the idea of meaning as use, right?
Yes.
He argues that the meaning of a word isn't a magical private object hidden inside your brain, and it certainly isn't a platonic form floating in a different dimension.
He uses the concept of language games. To understand meaning, you have to look at how people actually operate.
Okay.
If you have two builders working together and one yells slab, the meaning of the word slab is found entirely in the fact that the other builder goes and retrieves a piece of stone.
Oh, I see.
A hammer has meaning because of how we use it to build things together. A word has meaning because of how it functions within a shared social reality, a shared form of life. Meaning is fundamentally public, practical, and functional.
I follow the logic, but
Yeah.
this is where I actually have to push back based on the frameworks we've built in our prior deep dives. We've talked extensively about the concept of semantic frames and the co-birth of form and content. Wittgenstein says meaning is just use. But a use only works, it only functions, if there's a pre-existing field of differences to operate within.
Right.
You can't have a difference from nowhere. To use a word correctly means distinguishing it from an incorrect use. Doesn't that imply a massive underlying structure of intelligibility that has to be there before the use can even get off the ground?
That is the crucial limitation of Wittgenstein's framework, and it connects directly to the internalist critique we will explore later, meaning as use still requires a field in which use can make a difference.
Exactly.
As we established in previous deep dives, distinction is the co-birth of form and content. Content without form is indeterminate noise. Form without content is an empty abstraction. Meaning is the intelligible face of distinction. Wittgenstein successfully grounds meaning in practice, pulling it out of the metaphysical sky, but he still presupposes a vast inherited architecture of differences, a semantic frame. He describes how the game is played, but he doesn't fully explain why the board exists or why we care about winning.
So both the existentialists and Wittgenstein are desperately trying to find a place to stand after the cosmic house collapses.
Right.
Existentialism tries to ground it in radical human will, and Wittgenstein tries to ground it in shared social practice. But neither of them fully solves the underlying anxiety of the empty lot.
No, they don't.
If the cosmos won't give us a purpose, and inventing your own essence is exhausting, and relying purely on social language games feels arbitrary, what happens to a person when they fall through the cracks of all these systems?
Well, the default psychological result for many people when cosmic meaning collapses is nihilism. And we have to be very precise about what nihilism actually looks like.
It's not just sitting around in a black turtleneck.
No, it isn't just a neutral, passive state of staring at a blank wall. It is an active pathology. It breeds grievance. It breeds a profound sense of victimhood, and ultimately a desire for vengeance against reality itself.
If life is fundamentally characterized by suffering, disease, loss, betrayal, death, and that suffering has no cosmic justification, then existence itself starts to look like a terrible mistake, or worse, a cruel joke played on conscious beings.
And if you believe you are the victim of a cruel joke, you inevitably want to punish whoever told it.
Right.
You want to punish the structure of reality. This is exactly the psychological territory Jordan Peterson addresses in Chapter 6 of his book, 12 Rules for Life. The rule is explicitly phrased, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Peterson is diagnosing a very specific, very modern pathology here. He sees that nihilistic resentment emerges when suffering and alienation replace responsibility and gratitude.
Yeah.
When a person feels crushed by the tragedy of existence, the easiest, most seductive temptation is to adopt an ideological abstraction. You blame capitalism, you blame the patriarchy, you blame human nature, you blame genetics, or you blame God. You become a critic of the cosmos, sitting in judgment of reality itself.
Peterson points to the horrific extreme of this mindset by analyzing the manifestos of mass shooters, like the Columbine killers.
Which is chilling to read.
It is. When you read those texts, you don't just see anger at specific people. You see a totalizing hatred for the very structure of being. They view existence as fundamentally corrupt and decide to act as the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner, destroying life simply because it has the audacity to exist. It is the ultimate manifestation of cosmic resentment.
To counter this terrifying black hole of resentment, the sources highlight the story of Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Soviet Gulag as the ultimate counterexample.
It's a powerful story.
Solzhenitsyn is in the middle of a literal state-sponsored hell. He has been stripped of his freedom, his career, his family. He's starving, freezing, working in lethal conditions, and facing death in a totalitarian nightmare. He has every single justification to curse God, to curse humanity, and to let a perfectly rational resentment consume him completely.
But he takes a different path, a path that Peterson views as the foundational requirement for surviving tragedy.
Right.
Instead of generating a manifesto of cosmic victimhood, Solzhenitsyn took absolute personal responsibility. Sitting in the misery of the Gulag, he examined his own past. He asked himself a brutal series of questions.
Like what?
How did my own previous unquestioning support of the Communist Party contribute to this? How did my own daily lies, my own moral cowardice, my own failures of character help build the very prison system I am now dying in?
He turned the lens entirely inward. He didn't say, the world is fundamentally evil and I am its innocent victim. He said, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, including mine. How have I failed, and how can I repair my own soul right now in this horrific place?
Out of that agonizing internal auditing, that radical acceptance of local responsibility, he survived and eventually wrote The Gulag Archipelago.
Wow.
That book played a massive historical role in dismantling the intellectual and moral credibility of the Soviet system. Peterson's core argument is that Solzhenitsyn answers cosmic accusation with local responsibility.
Because Peterson understands that value is religious before it is merely psychological. And we need to clarify what he means by religious in this context.
Yeah, that's important.
He isn't talking about going to church on Sunday. He means that value is the fundamental, all-encompassing orientation of a person's life. It organizes your perception, it dictates what you look at, what you ignore, and how you act.
Peterson sees meaning as the ultimate antidote to nihilistic collapse. Local responsibility rescues a person from drowning in cosmic abstraction. If you align yourself properly, if you take on the burden of being voluntarily, the meaning that manifests in your local environment will be profound enough to justify the inevitable suffering of life.
So for Peterson, the loss of meaning is the ultimate danger, and the recovery of meaning through responsibility is the salvation.
Exactly.
Let's apply this practically. Instead of sitting in your room writing a massive, angry internet manifesto about how the fundamental structure of society is evil and oppressive, you just get up, walk into your kitchen, and fix the leaky faucet.
Right.
You take the chaos right in front of you, the chaos you actually have control over, and you order it.
Mm-hmm.
That act of ordering generates meaning, and that meaning acts as a psychological shield against the tragedy of life. Meaning is the medicine that cures the disease of nihilism.
That is the optimistic framework. But this is where our deep dive takes a very sharp, very dark, and structurally necessary turn.
Okay, bracing myself.
Because there is a philosophical critique that looks at Peterson's entire thesis and asks a terrifying question. What if Peterson has the polarity exactly backward?
Meaning what?
What if meaning isn't the cure? What if meaning is the actual disease?
Okay, we are entering the territory of the inverted value critique. In our sources, this is often referred to as eulovism, and again, repeating our disclaimer, we are exploring this as a structural philosophical argument. We are mapping the logic objectively, no matter how disturbing the conclusions are.
The sources extract this philosophy from the audio recordings left behind by Adam Lanza, and the logic completely upends everything we just discussed. Eulovism is the view that goodness is merely the fulfillment of value, and value itself is a structural disease inherent to life.
Let's break down the mechanics of value as a disease. The argument states that life inherently imposes a structure of here versus there. It creates a permanent contrast between lack and fulfillment, between deprivation and satisfaction.
Think about the basic biological mechanism of homeostasis. An organism exists in a constant state of decay and depletion. You burn energy, so you experience a lack, a deprivation we call hunger.
Right, you need food.
You are driven to seek food to fulfill that value. Once you eat, you experience a temporary satisfaction, but the clock immediately resets. The organism is essentially an engine that generates needs and then frantically tries to satisfy them over and over until it dies.
So life is just a treadmill of deprivation.
Exactly. But eulovism argues it doesn't stop at biology. Culture, according to this critique, is a massive transmission system that spreads even more complex artificial value frames.
Making it worse.
Yes, culture takes the basic biological structure of deprivation and multiplies it infinitely through language, identity, morality, rights, politics, art, status, and narratives of purpose.
It's like taking the basic biological itch of hunger and creating a million new psychological itches you didn't even know you could feel.
That's a good way to look at it.
The sources describe an awareness hierarchy in this philosophy that perfectly illustrates how bizarre but structurally consistent this logic is. We need to walk through the three levels: the modern human, the primitive human, and the rock. Let's start at the top with the modern human.
In the Eulivist view, a highly educated, highly aware modern human is the most burdened creature in existence. They are suffering not just from biological lack, but from immense cultural deprivation.
Because they want so many things.
Right. They want career status, they want artistic fulfillment, they are stressed by complex political ideologies, they're striving for moral purity, they are agonizing over their nuanced identity, they want romantic actualization. Their expanded awareness has created a massive, sprawling field of unmet possibilities.
They have a million different ways to feel like they are failing. Every new concept they learn is a new way to be deprived. Like, if you don't know what a Michelin star restaurant is, you can't be sad about not eating at one.
Precisely. Now, contrast that burden with a primitive human, or even an animal. According to this view, the primitive human is slightly better off. They still have severe biological needs, hunger, thirst, shelter from predators, but they are unburdened by the artificial values of complex modern culture.
Right.
They don't experience the psychological deprivation of lacking a prestigious career or failing to live up to an abstract moral kind or not having a refined aesthetic identity. Their field of depredation is smaller.
But the punchline, the really disturbing logical conclusion of this hierarchy, is the rock.
Yes. In the Eulivist framework, the rock is considered enlightened.
Enlightened.
Not because it possesses deep mystical wisdom, but because it possesses zero awareness and therefore zero capacity for value. It has no lack. It is not deprived of art. It is not deprived of water. It is not trying to get from here to there.
Wow.
It has no directional asymmetry. It simply is. In a philosophical system where value is defined as deprivation, the absence of deprivation is treated as the ultimate superiority. The rock is perfect because it needs nothing.
So, if value is a disease that creates deprivation, and awareness just expands the field of possible deprivation, how does this critique view the concept of meaning? Peterson says meaning is the medicine that saves us from suffering. What does the Eulivist say?
The inverted value critique argues that meaning is just the ultimate abstraction of value. Meaning is the interpretive smoke rising from the fire of biological and cultural compulsion.
Bleak.
Therefore, telling someone who is suffering to go find meaning or take on responsibility is not offering them a cure. It is pouring gasoline on the fire.
It's basically saying, you are suffering because you have all these unfulfilled biological and cultural needs, so here, let me give you a massive, overarching, incredibly heavy, abstract need called cosmic purpose to carry around on top of everything else.
The structural claim is that if meaning is an abstraction of value and value is the machinery of compulsion, then meaning is just the highest, most sophisticated layer of compulsion. You aren't escaping the treadmill, you are just giving the treadmill a heroic name.
I actually wrote down an analogy for this while reading the sources. This view is essentially saying that meaning is a flaming bandage.
A flaming bandage?
Yeah, you put it on a wound to cover it up, but the bandage itself is on fire. It's not actually healing the underlying tissue, it's just the wound, learning to narrate its own burning. The narrative makes the burning feel important, but you are still burning.
The wound learning to narrate itself. That perfectly captures the inverted value critique. Both Peterson and Lanza agree on something absolutely fundamental. Value is all-encompassing. It organizes everything we perceive and do.
Right.
But their conclusions are diametrically opposed. Peterson says, the collapse of meaning causes nihilism, so recover meaning to bear the tragedy of suffering. The Eulivist says meaning is just the abstraction of value, and the structure of value is the trap.
It's a complete inversion.
They see the fulfillment of meaning not as a triumph of the human spirit, but as a biological delusion that keeps the organism running on the hamster wheel of deprivation.
So we've arrived at a complete philosophical deadlock here, a total dichotomy. On one side, Peterson offers radical responsibility and optimism through meaning. On the other side, Eulivism offers a black hole of absolute pessimism where life itself and all its values are viewed as an architectural mistake.
Exactly.
If we reject Peterson as perhaps being too optimistic about meaning as a universal cure, because we've all seen how a person's meaning or purpose can be a tyrannical burden that ruins their life.
Yes, we have.
But we absolutely refuse to accept the Eulivist conclusion that a rock is superior to a human being. Where is the solid ground? How do we save the concept of meaning without falling into the trap of value?
To find the solid ground, we have to look at the internalist reversal, which brings us to the core argument of our primary source text, meaning and value.
Okay, break that down for me.
The fundamental mistake of both the cosmic architectures of the past, like Plato and scholasticism, and the nihilistic despairs of the present, is conflating two completely different things, cosmic meaning and internal valence.
We need to unpack those terms carefully. Cosmic meaning is the why am I here script, right? It's the external justification for existence. But valence is what exactly? How a feeling feels from the inside.
Valence is the intrinsic goodness or badness of an experience. It is the raw internal fact of what an experience is like. The internalist reversal argues that the collapse of cosmic meaning is not the collapse of valence.
Okay.
As the source text beautifully puts it, meaning fails upward before it fails inward.
What does that mean mechanically?
It means that existential nihilism, the realization that there is no grand cosmic why, no divine script, no objective purpose floating in space, is a cousin to moral nihilism, the belief that there is no moral ought and nothing matters at all.
Right.
But they are not twins. They are not the same thing. You can lose the cosmic architecture without losing the internal reality of experience.
So just because the universe is silent doesn't mean the wound is silent. A silent cosmos doesn't make a broken leg hurt any less.
Precisely. A silent universe does not silence the internal reality of suffering. And this brings us to the concept of terminal meaning. Internalism argues that meaning is not first an abstract story or a cultural narrative or a cosmic assignment added to life from the outside.
What is it then?
Meaning begins as a disclosure in raw valence experience.
Let's walk through the mechanics of terminal meaning. I need an everyday example.
Think about raw physical pain. Suppose you touch a hot stove. The pain you experience means not this or away. That meaning is there immediately, before any language, ideology, or culture assigns a name to it.
A baby who doesn't speak a single word still understands the terminal meaning of a hot stove.
Exactly. Hunger means lack. Fear means threat. Relief means release. The significance, the directionality, the meaning of the feeling is inherent to the feeling itself. It doesn't need to borrow its meaning from a higher concept or a divine creator.
So we are bypassing the existentialist panic entirely. Sartre and Camus were agonizing over having to invent meaning out of the void through sheer will. But internalism says you don't have to invent meaning out of nothing, because meaning is already happening the moment experience differentiates itself into positive and negative valences.
Yeah.
The system comes preloaded with significance.
Experience is the terminal frame. It is the absolute bedrock. And suffering is a special, highly specific terminal disclosure within experience. Suffering closes the amoral concept of directional asymmetry.
Stop right there. Directional asymmetry is heavy philosophical jargon. What is the actual mechanism you are describing?
Think of a magnet. A magnet intrinsically has a push and a pull. It doesn't need a cultural narrative to repel the opposite pole. The physics of the magnetic field do the repelling.
Right, it just happens.
Valenced experience is the psychological equivalent of that magnetic repulsion. Suffering is appearing as internally against itself. It is a psychological state that inherently rejects its own occurrence. It pushes away from itself.
And this inherent push, this internal rejection, is why internalism takes a very specific, nuanced stance on negative utilitarianism.
It does.
Negative utilitarianism is the philosophy that says minimizing suffering is the highest or only moral priority. But the sources say internalism views negative utilitarianism not as a commandment from the sky, but as a practical shadow. What is the distinction?
The distinction is epistemological. A traditional moral philosopher might say, it is an objective law of the universe that you ought to reduce suffering. The internalist looks at that and says, no, the rule you ought to reduce suffering isn't a moral law written on a metaphysical tablet floating in space.
Okay, so what is it?
It is simply the practical consequence of looking clearly at what suffering internally discloses.
The badness of suffering isn't assigned by a theory, it is disclosed by the experience itself.
Exactly. Suffering internally discloses the ought not. If you experience intense suffering, the state itself is screaming this should not be happening. Negative utilitarianism is just the shadow cast by that internal reality when you try to write it down as a philosophical rule.
I have to push back here, because this seems to collapse all ethics into subjective feeling. If pain internally means not this and inherently discloses an ought not, how do you explain human behaviors where people actively seek out pain?
What kind of behaviors?
What about masochism? What about an athlete running a grueling 100-mile ultramarathon until their feet bleed? What about people undergoing intense body modification? They are choosing pain. They want the pain. Does their choice invalidate the concept of terminal meaning?
That is a crucial challenge, and it requires us to make a vital structural distinction. We have to separate pain, which is a sensory input, a nociceptive signal from the nervous system, from suffering, cause suffering, which is an aversive psychological deprivation.
So pain is the signal, suffering is the interpretation of the signal.
In a way, yes. In the context of masochism or an ultramarathon, the physical pain is heavily framed, controlled, and often actively desired as a necessary pathway to a different, higher fulfillment, like the runner's high, the triumph of crossing the finish line, or a specific psychological release. The total experiential field is not one of involuntary terminal rejection. The internalist isn't saying every intense sensory input of pain is a moral law. They are saying that true suffering, the state of involuntary, unmitigated aversion, is the terminal disclosure of the ought not.
Okay, I see the nuance. It's not about the raw data of pain. It's about the internal state of absolute aversion.
The root of normativity, the very reason the concept of mattering or ought gets any grip on the human mind in the first place, stems from this terminal disclosure of directional asymmetry.
Got it.
Suffering is here against here. It internally rejects its own occurrence. You do not need a cosmic architecture, a divine rule book, or a social language game to prove that suffering is aversive. It proves itself from the inside instantly.
So terminal meaning, our raw, valenced experience, is the solid bedrock. It's the grounding that neither Peterson nor Lanza fully isolated. But this raises a massive practical question for me. If terminal meaning is the foundation, and our raw experiences of joy, pain, connection, and hunger are so obvious, how do things go so incredibly wrong? How does the meaning we build on top of our lives, our careers, our political ideologies, our identities become so toxic and pathological?
That question brings us directly to the mechanism of pathology. How does meaning turn into a weapon? The sources identify a specific process called the bad magic trick.
Okay, walk me through that.
We start with terminal meaning, the raw bedrock. But humans are not just sensing creatures, we are abstracting creatures. We possess a prefrontal cortex. We build higher-level interpretations to navigate the world. We build concepts like identity, culture, morality, status, and destiny. These are forms of abstract meaning.
And we need abstract meaning, right? I mean, you can't run a complex civilization just on raw, terminal feelings of hunger and relief. You need agriculture, law, contracts, social norms.
Absolutely. Abstraction is necessary for survival, science, art, and complex cooperation. The problem isn't abstraction itself. The problem is the bad magic trick, which unfolds in 4 distinct stages. Let's walk through them.
Okay.
First, experience discloses significance. For example, the warmth, safety, and mutual support of your local tribe. That is a terminal disclosure.
Second, abstraction organizes it. We take that raw feeling of safety and create a conceptual bucket called loyalty or patriotism or the nation.
Third, abstraction forgets its source. The concept becomes untethered from the raw experience of human connection that birthed it. It becomes a free-floating ideal.
And the fourth stage.
Fourth, the abstraction returns as a command, a destiny, a duty. And it tyrannizes the original experience.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, you're told you must sacrifice the actual concrete people in your community, the very people who generated the feeling of safety in the first place, to serve the abstract, bloodthirsty idea of the nation.
The map destroys the mountain. It's like drawing a map to navigate a beautiful, life-giving mountain range.
Sure.
The map is incredibly useful. It helps you find water, it helps you avoid cliffs.
Sure.
But eventually you stare at the map so long, you put so much effort into drawing the lines perfectly, that you fall in love with the map. You forget the map is just a representation of the dirt and rock.
Exactly.
And then, when you find a real mountain that doesn't perfectly fit your drawing, you don't redraw the map. You bring in bulldozers and dynamite to destroy the actual mountain so it matches your piece of paper.
That is the perfect visualization of meaning becoming a scar. Meaning becomes a scar when layers of abstraction go to war with terminal meaning, when form feeds on content. And this happens everywhere, on both micro and macro scales. Think about instrumental value ignoring valence in our daily lives.
I see this all the time with hustle culture and modern fitness tracking. The Strava analogy is perfect here. You start running because of terminal disclosure, the pure raw joy of movement, the feeling of the wind, the physical health, the peace of mind. That is layer 1.
Then you add layer 2. You want to organize that joy. So you download an app to track your miles. You create a metric, an abstraction.
And then the bad magic trick happens. The metric forgets its source. It was supposed to serve your joy and health. The abstraction returns as a tyrant.
Right.
Suddenly, you are forcing yourself to run 50 miles a week on a fractured shin, completely miserable, ignoring your body's terminal disclosure of pain, just to maintain a digital streak on a screen.
Form feeds on content.
Exactly. The abstraction of being a dedicated runner is literally cannibalizing the physical health it was meant to protect.
And if you scale that mechanism up from an individual runner to an entire society, you get the great historical tragedies. History is littered with utopian ideologies that justify torturing, starving, and killing actual, concrete human beings today in the name of an abstract, perfect society tomorrow.
That's horrific.
The moral mission becomes evil when it stops hearing the wound. The abstraction of historical destiny or moral purity becomes a flaming crown that burns the wearer and everyone they have power over.
And this brings us to a fascinating realization about the inverted value critique. The Eulovists, people like Adam Lanza, actually got something right, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Eulovism successfully identified the bad magic trick. It looked at human culture and saw how language, status, and abstract values are constantly weaponized against the organism. It saw how meaning can become a compulsive treadmill that generates endless artificial deprivation.
Right.
But it profoundly misdiagnosed the core issue.
The disease isn't meaning itself. The disease isn't the terminal disclosure of experience. The disease is the unexamined propagation of value without terminal justification.
Exactly. The Eulovist looks at the bulldozers destroying the mountain for the sake of the map and concludes, mountains are a mistake. Existence is a flaw. We should all just be rocks.
And what does the internalist say?
The internalist looks at the bulldozers and says, no, the map is rebelling against its creator. We don't need to destroy the mountain. We need to fire the bulldozer drivers and put the map back in its proper subordinate place.
Which sets up our final critical exploration. If the problem is the map rebelling against the territory, how do we stop it? How do we build healthy meaning in our actual day-to-day lives? If meaning is fundamentally grounded in experience, then our entire approach to ethics has to change shape.
Ethics is no longer primarily about obeying an external command from a cosmic architecture, nor is it about calculating an abstract mathematical utility function. Ethics becomes epistemology.
Ethics as epistemology, meaning it's about knowing correctly, it's about accuracy.
It is about maintaining vertical coherence between your ideas and your reality. The practical question is not what external moral law must I obey, but rather how should an intelligent control system respond when reality discloses non-neutral experience, especially suffering.
Okay, I see.
The sources break this epistemological challenge down into three distinct layers: disclosure, motivation, and control.
Let's walk through those carefully, because this is the diagnostic tool for you listening. Layer 1 is disclosure.
Disclosure is where significance first appears. It's the bedrock. It's what experience is like from within. Suffering discloses aversion. Peace discloses sufficiency. Beauty discloses invitation. Fear discloses threat.
These are the terminal facts on the ground. These are the actual mountains.
Layer 2 is motivation.
Which is what?
Motivation is how a system responds to disclosure. It's what we are drawn to seek, avoid, or protect. And here is the critical vulnerability. Motivation can track disclosure well, or it can track it terribly.
Give me an example.
A person can be motivated to relieve suffering when they see it, or they can be ideologically trained to ignore it, to aestheticize it, or to exploit it. Motivation is a reaction to valence, but it is not identical to it. The alarm is not the fire.
And layer 3 is control.
Control is the practical architecture we build to interface with reality. It's the habits, the technologies, the laws, the social institutions, the political systems, the daily strategies we use to intervene in the world. Even if your motivation is perfectly aligned, even if you desperately want to stop suffering, your control system can be clumsy, confused, counterproductive, or entirely broken.
The sources use a fantastic clarifying metaphor here: the fire department.
Yes. Most moral theories completely confuse the fire, the alarm, and the fire department. In this metaphor, the fire is the disclosed suffering, layer 1. The alarm ringing in the station is the motivation and recognition, layer 2. The fire department, the trucks, the hoses, the bureaucracy, that is the control system, the strategy, the action, layer 3.
We can apply this to massive historical failures. Think about 20th century utopian political movements, like the one Solzhenitsyn was trapped in.
Yes, perfect example.
The founders of those movements often started with a genuine recognition of suffering. They saw poverty, exploitation, and misery. The fire was real. The alarm rang. But their control system, the rigid authoritarian bureaucracy, the forced collectivization, the gulags, was a catastrophic failure.
And what happens when a control system fails so spectacularly? It often turns around and tries to rewrite the lower layers to justify its failure.
To protect the ideology.
Exactly. The state apparatus starts telling the starving citizens, you aren't actually suffering. Your pain is just a necessary transition phase for the glorious revolution. The fire isn't burning you, it's purifying you. The control system demands that the disclosure lie about itself.
A broken alarm doesn't mean there is no fire. A terrible, inefficient, or tyrannical fire department doesn't mean the alarm was wrong to ring. And a peaceful room doesn't need to be set on fire just because some abstract theory thinks a brighter flame would be aesthetically better.
The layers must remain distinct, but they must remain vertically connected. Conceptual coherence means the upper layers, the control systems and motivations, must constantly answer to what the lower layer, the terminal disclosure, is actually saying.
This gives you a completely new, incredibly sharp lens for evaluating your own life. When you feel overwhelmed by the meaning or the purpose you are chasing, whether it's a career goal that is burning you out, a political identity that's making you chronically angry, or a moral mission that is alienating you from your family, you have to stop and run a diagnostic.
You have to ask, is this goal still answering to my actual experience? Or has it become an abstract tyrant? Is it a healthy meaning or an unhealthy meaning?
Right. What defines a healthy meaning?
Healthy meaning is form in harmony with content. It remembers its source. It allows for peace. It allows for joy. And crucially, it doesn't invent guilt where no wound exists. It doesn't demand endless optimization just for the sake of an abstract scorecard. It uses the map to enjoy the mountain.
An unhealthy meaning is form feeding on content. It imposes external purpose over raw experience, turns your agency into duty. It turns love into a rigid possession. It sacrifices the concrete reality of today for the abstract destiny of tomorrow. Unhealthy meaning is the bad magic trick running the show.
We need the abstractions. We need the maps. We cannot build a society, conduct science, or forge deep relationships without complex conceptual frameworks. But the upper layers must always answer to the lower layers. The map serves the mountain.
So well said.
Meaning, ultimately, is disclosure remembered by abstraction. When abstraction remembers the raw disclosure that birthed it, it acts as a bridge to reality. When it forgets, it becomes a cage.
What a massive, sweeping arc we've covered today. The history of meaning really is a history of displacement.
It really is.
We started by putting it in the cosmic architecture with Plato, Aristotle, and scholasticism, letting a divinely ordered universe tell us exactly who we were and what we were for.
And then the mechanistic physics of the scientific revolution dismantled that comfortable house.
And we panicked. We tried to force meaning into existence through sheer defiance with the existentialists or
Then we looked at how Jordan Peterson attempted to use local responsibility as a psychological shield against the chaos of the void, saving us from resentment.
And we confronted the terrifying Eulavist critique that almost convinced us that the entire pursuit of meaning was just a biological disease of value, a treadmill of infinite deprivation.
But ultimately, we found the solid ground right back where it all started, inside the organism, in the inherent terminal disclosure of our own valenced experience.
A burn means not this, and a warm embrace means sufficiency. Long before any philosopher writes a book about it, and long before any culture assigns a status hierarchy to it.
The bedrock is real. The fire is real. Our only job is to build a fire department that doesn't actively burn the house down while trying to save it.
Which brings us to our final thought for this deep dive. We started this journey looking for a clean diagnosis, a simple answer to why the modern world feels so uniquely exhausting. We didn't find a single magic bullet. We found a complex, layered system of raw disclosures and high-level abstractions constantly interacting and sometimes warring with each other.
So here is a thought to mull over as you navigate your own architecture. Think about the one thing in your life right now that you derive the most intense meaning from. It could be your career trajectory, your ultimate creative goal, your rigid political alignment, or the core identity you project to the world.
Look very closely at that abstraction.
Now ask yourself, is that meaning acting as a bridge to connect you more deeply to the reality of your own experience and the experiences of others? Or has it quietly become a psychological shield designed to block reality out?
Is your map helping you hike the mountain, or is it telling you to start the bulldozers? Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly intense structural journey today. This has been The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.